In a quiet suburban neighborhood, everything seemed peaceful, until one neighbor's reckless actions set off a chain reaction that could destroy it all. What started as an innocent favor quickly spiraled into a disaster, leaving one man to face the ultimate test of patience and justice. When Karen, the entitled HOA resident, repeatedly plugged her electric car into his outdoor outlet, the consequences were far worse than anyone could imagine. Now, Zane must confront the woman responsible, or risk losing everything he's worked. 4. What happens next will leave you on the edge of your seat. Zane had always loved the quiet, suburban charm of his neighborhood. The sound of chirping birds, the scent of freshly cut grass, and the sight of children riding bikes down the street. It was a peaceful place. But peace, as he would soon learn, was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the wrong neighbor. That neighbor was Karen. She lived 2 houses down, in an immaculate home with a pristine lawn and a habit of sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Zane's first encounter with her had been brief and polite. A quick smile as she waved from across the street, her bleach blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun. She seemed nice, but he quickly realized that Karen had an obsession with control. It wasn't long before she started making subtle changes to the neighborhood, all in the name of betterment. It started innocuously enough. Karen would leave passive-aggressive notes on people's doors about their trash bins being out too early, or their lawns needing trimming. A little snip here and there, suggesting improvements, like a secret agent of the homeowners association. But soon, it became clear that Zane was on her radar. It began with his mailbox. Zane had never thought much about the modest metal box that stood by the sidewalk, but one day, Karen knocked on his door, eyes wide with concern. "Zane, darling, your mailbox is a violation," she said, her voice sugary sweet yet laced with judgment. "It doesn't match the HOA's aesthetic standards. You'll need to replace it." Zane had been stunned. "What? It's a mailbox." "Just doing my part, sweetheart," Karen had replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, before walking away without giving him a chance to respond. Zane shook his head, thinking it was an isolated incident. But the next day he found a note on his front door. It was from Karen, warning him that the front gate he had recently installed was too private and needed to be adjusted. That was when the real tension began. It wasn't just about aesthetics anymore, it was about control. Karen was creeping into every corner of his life. Zane's frustration mounted when he noticed her eyes constantly scanning his property, her fingers twitching at the edges of her perfect little world. He couldn't shake the feeling that her prying was becoming more personal, more invasive. Little did he know, this was just the beginning. The calm before the storm. He had no idea that his battle with Karen would soon turn into something far more dangerous, something that would push him to his limits and beyond. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Zane had just finished mowing the lawn when he saw her. Karen, standing in his driveway, fiddling with the outdoor outlet near the garage. At first he thought he was imagining things, but no, there she was, her perfectly manicured fingers connecting her charging cable to the socket. His heart skipped a beat. "Karen?" he called out, squinting against the harsh midday sun. She straightened up with a bright smile as if she'd done nothing more than ask for a cup of sugar. "Oh, Zane, hello," she greeted him too cheerfully, almost overly so. "I was just charging my electric car for a bit. You don't mind, do you?" Zane stood frozen for a moment, staring at the charging cable snaking from her car to his outlet. It didn't make sense. This wasn't some public charging station. It was his personal outlet, installed specifically for his own tools and equipment. His eyes narrowed as a flicker of unease swept over him. Karen?" Zane began, his voice cautious but polite. That outlet is for my yard tools. It's not really meant for, charging cars. Oh, I know, dear, Karen responded, waving her hand dismissively. But it's just for a short while. My usual charging spot's all the way on the other side of the neighborhood. This is so much more convenient. I promise. I'll be quick. Zane forced a tight smile, trying to mask the growing sense of unease that was gnawing at him. Something about her nonchalant attitude set him on edge. Still, he didn't want to make a scene. It wasn't like she was stealing electricity yet. He shrugged, thinking it was probably harmless. No problem, he said, forcing the words out. Just make sure to unplug when you're done. Karen beamed, giving him a quick nod before returning to her car, her high heels clicking against the pavement as she climbed back in. Zane watched her for a few seconds, the image of her smiling face lingering in his mind. He wasn't sure why, but something about this whole situation felt off. He tried to shake it off. It was probably nothing. But as he walked back to his garden shed, he couldn't stop the nagging feeling that Karen had done this before. That she'd done something like this to others, testing the boundaries of what she could get away with. And then it hit him. What if this wasn't just about charging her car? What if there was something else going on here? Zane's pulse quickened. His mind raced, already crafting theories, all of them unsettling. He glanced back at Karen, who was now comfortably sitting in her car, scrolling through her phone. He didn't trust her. Not one bit. It started with a smell, a faint, musty odor that seemed to come from nowhere, lingering in the corners of Zane's house. At first he thought it was just his imagination, the byproduct of a long, humid summer day. But as the days wore on, the smell grew stronger, creeping into the kitchen, the living room, even his bedroom at night. It wasn't just an ordinary smell. It was the kind of stench that made your stomach churn, something between rotten eggs and wet concrete. He couldn't pinpoint it. It wasn't the garbage. It wasn't the old pipes in the basement. But it was there, an invisible presence haunting his home. Then came the electrical glitches. At first they were small, almost imperceptible. The flickering of a light here, a low hum from the refrigerator there. Zane ignored it, chalking it up to the age of the house. But the problems continued to escalate. His kitchen lights began to buzz at odd hours, like something was drawing too much power. His phone charger, when plugged into the same outlet he'd seen Karen use, buzzed with a strange static. It was as if the entire electrical system in his house was strained. Something wasn't right. Zane had always trusted his intuition, and it was screaming at him now. The pieces started clicking together, but not in the way he wanted. There was a connection. The car, the outlet, the smell. His thoughts spiraled, but the answer he was hoping to avoid surfaced. The septic tank. Zane had a vague recollection of the layout of his property. The septic tank wasn't far from the garage, and the outlet he had installed, the one Karen had used, was directly above the access point for the tank. He had never thought about it much. Why would he? But now, the more he thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. The smell was too foul to ignore. The electrical issues weren't a coincidence. And Karen's car, plugged into the outlet, had to be the catalyst. His pulse quickened. The septic tank wasn't just some buried container. It was the lifeblood of his plumbing. It had pipes that led everywhere, and if something was wrong, it could spread. Through the pipes, through the wiring. Zane's heart pounded in his chest. As he made his way outside, the thought of the mess ahead gnawing at him. His eyes locked onto the outlet. He knew now, without a doubt, that Karen's use of it was no mistake, and that meant one horrifying thing. The septic tank was failing, and Karen had unknowingly made it worse. Zane paced in his living room, his mind racing. He couldn't shake. The thought of Karen, her car plugged into his outlet, the stench wafting through his house like a warning sign he had ignored for far too long. The septic tank was on the verge of collapse, and Karen had made it worse by using his outlet, something he couldn't ignore any longer. His nerves were a coil, tightly wound. He had to confront her. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, squinting against the harsh sunlight. Her house was only a few doors down, but it felt like miles away. He approached with caution, trying to calm his rising anxiety. But as he neared her front porch, his mind raced with what he might say. How could he make her understand the danger she had caused? He rang the doorbell, his finger trembling slightly. Moments later, Karen appeared in the doorway, her smile wide and completely unaffected. "Zane, darling, what a surprise! Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice sweet but laced with something almost too polished, too rehearsed. "I need to talk to you about the outlet," Zane began, keeping his tone level but firm. "You've been using it to charge your car, and it's been causing some issues." Karen's eyes flickered for just a moment, the barest hint of discomfort. But she quickly masked it, stepping aside and gesturing for him to come in. "Of course, please. Come in. Let's have a chat." Zane hesitated but entered, his eyes scanning the spotless interior. Karen's house was as immaculate as her appearance. Everything in its place, nothing out of order. It was almost as if she was trying too hard to maintain perfection. "Look, Karen," Zane said, his voice tight with frustration, "there's a serious problem with the septic tank. It's starting to fail, and the outlet you're using, it's connected to it. Every time you plug your car in, it makes the situation worse. The smell, the electrical issues, it's all connected." Karen's smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, Zane, you're being dramatic. It's just a small outlet. It's not as serious as you think." Zane's jaw tightened. "No, Karen, it is serious. You could be damaging the entire system. This isn't something to brush off." She waved her hand dismissively, the glint in her eyes now cold and calculating. "You're overreacting. I'm sure it's fine. It's just a few extra minutes of charging. No harm done." Zane's pulse quickened. She was dismissing it just like that. The reality of the situation wasn't clicking for her. Or worse, she knew and didn't care. Her defensiveness stung, and a sinking feeling settled in his chest. He wasn't getting through to her, but he had to push. "You don't understand. Karen, this could cause a disaster if we don't act fast." Her gaze locked onto his, her smile returning but colder this time. "I think you're making too much of a fuss," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "It'll be fine, Zane. Trust me." Zane stood there, the weight of her words crashing down on him. His instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. But as Karen's smile grew even wider, he knew. This confrontation was far from over. Zane's heart raced as he crouched beside the septic tank's access point, the reality of the situation hitting him like a punch to the gut. He had never thought to check the tank before, assuming it was just another part of the property that would run on its own, quietly and efficiently. But the smell, that relentless, stomach-churning odor, had forced his hand. Now, standing at the tank, he could see the damage in front of him, the telltale signs of something that had been slowly deteriorating for far too long. The lid of the tank had buckled slightly, a crack running through the concrete like a web of fractures. The smell had intensified as Zane lifted the cover, and a sickening wave of rot flooded his senses. He grimaced, but forced himself to look closer. It wasn't just the smell. It was the muck inside, the contents swirling ominously. The tank was clogged, its contents rising far higher than they should have been. It was on the verge of overflowing, a disaster waiting to happen. Zane's stomach tightened as he pieced together the full scope of what was going wrong. The septic tank had been built to handle the flow of waste and wastewater from his house. Whoa! But the additional strain of Karen's electric car charging was too much. The outlet had been rigged to a part of the plumbing that was too close to the tank, and every time she plugged in, the current didn't just feed her car, It was drawing from the system itself, creating a backflow of power that overloaded the system. If this continued, the septic tank would fail completely. It could crack open, overflow, and flood the yard. Worse, the system might send raw waste into the pipes of his home. A catastrophe, one that could cost thousands to fix. His mind raced with the implications of what had already happened. The potential for chaos if he didn't act quickly. He took a step back, his mind spinning. Karen's careless actions had nearly destroyed the system, and she didn't even realize it. Worse, she hadn't even bothered to apologize. Zane clenched his fists in frustration. She didn't care. She never did. But he wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not after what she'd caused. Zane knew he needed a plan. Something that would make her understand the consequences of her ignorance. He needed to hit her where it would hurt. Teach her a lesson she would never forget. He glanced back at her pristine home, the pristine lawn, and the image of her smug smile flashed in his mind. Zane's eyes narrowed. It was time to get even. And he wasn't about to let her off easy. Zane's pulse was a steady drumbeat in his ears as he stood over the septic tank, the full weight of the disaster settling on him like a suffocating blanket. The crack in the tank, the clogged pipes. Whoopee! All the signs pointed to a failing system. But as he stood there trying to make sense of it, a thought flickered in the back of his mind, one that he couldn't ignore. The power surge from Karen's car. Could it have done more than just strain the system? His gut clenched as he inspected the wiring near the tank. The heavy-duty cable that led to the outlet seemed different. Something about it didn't sit right. The wire looked burned in spots, with charred edges where the current seemed to have short-circuited. That wasn't just a simple overload. There had been a malfunction somewhere. Something catastrophic. Zane's breath caught in his throat. The truth hit him like a freight train. The outlet wasn't just connected to the septic tank, it was also tied to the underground electrical system. The charging current from Karen's car had been coursing through that wire, triggering a series of electrical faults. And now, the septic tank wasn't the only thing at risk. The entire electrical system beneath the house was on the verge of collapse. The wires had begun to fuse with the metal pipes, creating an unstable, volatile environment. If the malfunction wasn't corrected soon, the entire system could short-circuit. A fire hazard that could engulf everything. The house, the neighborhood. Zane cursed under his breath. He needed to act fast, or there would be no saving this. He scrambled for the toolkit in his garage, his hands shaking as he pulled out a crowbar and wrench. He had to isolate the power, cut off the supply before it triggered a chain reaction. He had no time to lose. As he rushed back to the septic area, his mind raced with the implications of his findings. How had Karen not known? Had she really not understood the risk? It was one thing to ignore the obvious signs of a failing septic tank, but to overlook a malfunctioning electrical system. It was reckless, beyond careless. The more Zane thought about it, the more his anger swelled. Karen had been so quick to dismiss him, so arrogant in her belief that everything would just be fine. But she hadn't understood the magnitude of what she'd done. He had to stop it. Stop it now. He knelt by the wiring, about to make the first cut when a noise behind him startled him. A shadow flickered across the yard. Someone was coming. Someone was here. Zane froze. His blood ran cold. The last thing he expected was for Karen to show up now, not when everything was on the edge of disaster. And yet there she was, walking toward him with that same innocent smile plastered across her face. "Zane, darling," she called. "You're acting like I've done something terrible. It's just a little power surge, right?" Zane's heart raced. Something was off. Something far worse was about to unfold. Zane's hands were steady now, his anger a sharp, controlled edge as he tightened the last screw on the fuse box. The electric current was finally cut off from the tank, the wiring safely disconnected. But that wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. He had to make Karen understand the consequences of her carelessness. He wasn't going to let her off easy. He stood and wiped his hands on his pants, casting one last look at the septic tank. The danger was temporarily contained, but the neighborhood was still at risk if Karen didn't face up to her actions. His plan had to work, and it had to hit her where it hurt. He strode toward the front of his house, his mind already turning the gears of his next move. Karen wasn't going to get away with this. Not without understanding how deeply she had jeopardized everyone around her. He grabbed his phone, sent a quick text to the HOA board members, and waited. Within minutes, they started arriving, each one with a curious, cautious air. Zane had made sure to alert them, detailing the situation in just enough detail to ensure they understood the gravity of what had happened. This wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance. This was negligence. This was a ticking time bomb. He didn't have to wait long. Karen's electric car rolled up the driveway, her confident smile unwavering as she parked near Zane's front lawn. Her presence was almost mocking, as if she had no clue the storm she was about to face. "Zane, darling," she called out, stepping out of the car with that same irritating practiced sweetness. "I just don't understand what the fuss is all about. It's just a little inconvenience." Zane's eyes narrowed. "Oh, it's more than just an inconvenience, Karen." He turned, and there, standing in front of his house, was the HOA board. They exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of Zane's words hanging heavy in the air. Karen's eyes widened for the first time since this whole thing had begun, but her arrogance didn't fade entirely. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked, her voice barely masking the tremor underneath. Zane stepped forward, his voice steady but full of conviction. "No, Karen, it's not a joke. What you did, what you've been doing, has put everyone here at risk. You've overloaded the electrical and septic systems, caused thousands of dollars in potential damage. You didn't even care." He turned toward the HOA board, his expression hardening. "This isn't just a personal issue anymore. It's a community issue. We're all paying the price for her recklessness." Karen's eyes flickered with a mix of disbelief and panic, but she quickly attempted to regain control. "You're exaggerating. You can't—" "I'm not exaggerating." Zane cut her off, his voice sharp. "This is the real consequence of ignoring boundaries. And now the HOA needs to make sure something like this never happens again." The board members nodded solemnly, their eyes shifting between Zane and Karen. The tension was palpable. Zane's plan had worked. Karen was cornered, her smugness replaced by a growing realization of her mistakes. But Zane wasn't done. Not yet. He wanted her to understand this lesson, deep down in her bones, and he had every intention of making sure she did. The HOA board stood in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on the quiet suburban street. Zane had said his piece, and Karen's arrogance was slowly melting away, replaced by something else, something much more vulnerable. Her confident, clipped words faltered as the implications of her actions became undeniable. The truth had been laid bare. The board members glanced at each other, then at Zane. There was no mistaking it. Now, Karen had caused damage, and it wasn't just a small issue. It was a full-blown crisis, one that had put the entire neighborhood at risk. The wiring, the septic tank, the overloaded systems, all of it had been set in motion by her careless decisions. Karen's voice was a whisper now, no longer the sharp, dismissive tone it had once been. I didn't know it would be this bad," she stammered, her eyes darting to the HOA members. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Zane stood tall, his heart still racing from the adrenaline of the confrontation, but now it was mixed with something else, a sense of justice, a feeling that, finally, Karen would understand the gravity of what she had done. The board members spoke among themselves, the tension in the air thick as they deliberated. Karen tried to speak up, but her words were drowned out by the HOA president's final declaration. "Karen, you've violated not only the trust of your neighbors, but also the community's safety. The damage is substantial, and we can't allow this to go unaddressed. Karen's face drained of color, the reality sinking in as the board decided on the next course of action. She would have to pay for the repairs. A hefty price, one that would force her to confront the consequences of her actions. Her once pristine facade had shattered, and she now stood exposed, her negligence exposed for all to see. As Zane watched Karen retreat into her home, her confidence now replaced by a simmering frustration, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of closure. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about responsibility. About making sure people like Karen didn't get away with treating others like obstacles in their way. Zane took a deep breath, reflecting on how far he'd come. The anxiety, the doubts, the moments when he'd considered letting it all slide. They seemed so distant now. Standing there in front of the HOA with Karen forced to face the consequences, Zane realized that sometimes justice wasn't just about what happened in the moment. It was about learning, standing up for what was right, and ensuring that the lessons were learned. The neighborhood felt quieter now, the weight of the confrontation lifting. Zane glanced around at the familiar homes, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He had taken control, and in doing so, he had given the community a voice, one that would no longer be ignored. The lesson had been learned, and Zane, for the first time in a long while, felt at ease. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.